Queen 2 is one of the most overlooked Queen albums in their entire discography. It also happens to be not only my favorite Queen album, but it holds its place as my #1 favorite album, period. But more importantly, it's also one of the most underrated anti-concept albums of all time. The reason I'm putting the word anti before the word concept is because it's not really a concept album per se. Well, at least that's what almost every piece of information you'd find on it would tell you. Such as this quote by the band's biographer George Purvis, who said that it was, quote, not a concept album, but a collection of songs with a loose theme running throughout. And this quote by the band's singer Freddie Mercury, who said, it just evolved to where there was a batch of songs that could be considered aggressive, or a black side, and there was a smoother side. My belief is that it truly is a concept album that just wasn't fully realized. It's not like one of those types of albums like Pink Floyd's The Wall or Rush's 2112, where the story is all laid out in order and in clearer detail. It's more like a game of Where's Waldo, but it's actually Where's the Story in Queen 2. Those who have listened to the album, or even the band that made it, would like to think that there's no story connected with it, but sit back as I tell you that I may have unraveled the truth behind this masterstroke. No pun intended. I feel that it will also make you consider it being a concept album when I tell you that Freddie Mercury was writing this album very loosely based on his own fantasy world that he created with his sister Kashmira by the name of Rai. There's not much more information on that subject, so we should assume that the term loosely based is indeed necessary. And now, with that bit of backstory out of the way, I'd like to take you all on a journey. We are going to discover the deeper meaning, the secret sauce, the hidden story in Queen's sophomore album, aka their most underrated masterpiece, Queen 2. Now, right off the bat, we're given an introduction that seems a bit off. It is a brilliantly executed multi-tracked guitar instrumental piece written by Brian May with the title, Procession. Let's first take a look at the title, Procession. What does that word mean? Does it have any context with the song, or even the album in general? Well, procession can mean a couple things, but for a more contextually appropriate theory, we can only assume it means a funeral march. But who could have died already in the very beginning of the album? And most importantly, why? There's no words in the track, so we're left to our own theories as to who it could have been. If I had to guess, maybe this isn't really meant to be the first starting point to the story, but rather a foreshadowing plot element that will make more sense as the album goes on. That's going to be a recurring theme in this album, but bear with me. Also, due to the instrumental sounding so eerie in tone, the person who died had to have been someone truly evil. Because why would a heroic character with a good heart and soul who died want to be sent off to such an unsettling piece like this? Well, hopefully we'll find out soon enough, but until then, let's move on to the next track. The next track, which contains the usual Queen formula with actual lyrical content, is the song Father to Son. Again written by Brian May, the song is sung in the perspective of our protagonist's father, who has survived countless battles with fierce and deadly ogres, ruled by none other than the infamous Black Queen. Although ogres and the Black Queen are not yet mentioned in this song, this will all make sense as the album proceeds. Here in this song, the protagonist's father claims that he has fought these battles for the greater good of his family legacy and to keep their country thriving in peace. Also, he claims to have an indecipherable letter to his son that contains his family's heritage, or in this case, their family song. and gives advice like, also more notable things like, kings will be crowned, and the word goes around, from father to son. Possibly meaning that he himself, the protagonist, who we will call Fred, one day will become a noble king. Fred, annoyed at the repetitive nature of their conversation, tells his father that he's heard it all before, and revolts at the thought of following in his father's footsteps. But his father reassures him that this is all meant to be, and that the tradition of his fathers and their fathers before them, giving their sons this letter back and forth, has helped their family and kingdom all their lives. He also tells Fred that the messages in the song will stay by his side until his loneliness, or possibly homesickness, goes away. Now, why did he mention loneliness? Is it due to Fred being lonely that his father's going away somewhere that he doesn't know about? Maybe to another battle? Or is it because of the subject matter in the next track? Speaking of which... The next track is another Brian May masterpiece titled White Queen As It Began. This is one of the more depressing tracks on the album, but effective nonetheless. Here, we are now in the perspective of our main character Fred, who mourns the loss of his one true love whom he called the White Queen. This could explain why he's lonely like we've already discussed in Father to Son. He constantly feels her presence so much that even if he feels truly alone, he seems to catch glimpses of her in many ways. Seeing visions of her eyes crying, so sad, her eyes. Stars in her hair, and even her spirit walking along his side while hearing her footsteps. Beneath her window have I stayed. I love the footsteps that she made, and when she came. Fred continues to mourn his lost love until he grows delirious and feels an unnatural force grab hold of his deteriorating sanity. My God is here, my darkest fear, I speak too late. It's the Nevermore. This darkest fear, he describes, could mean that his significant other has grown evil and wants nothing more than for the world to be filled with hatred and swarming with vile creatures, which his father fought numerous times previously. He now feels helpless and begins to think about the good times that they've shared together to ease the pain. Those good times are expressed in the next song. And Brian May just keeps on coming back to the writer's desk with these great songs. This one, however, does not have Freddie Mercury's vocals, but May himself. You never heard my song before, the music was too loud. Now, it's better to assume that no matter the singer, it's still the same perspective of our main character so far. Someday One Day deals not only with Fred's life spent with his former girlfriend before she became the White Queen, but also the hopelessness of what darkness would soon unfold in the coming years. Here in these lyrics, we hear Fred speaking with her while looking at a castle in the distance, claiming that she will one day become a queen. A misty castle waits for you, and you shall be a queen. This seems quite similar to how his father said that Fred will become a king in Father to Son. Then the hopeless part comes in as the visage of true evil in the form of only a dark cloud takes over their kingdom and the residents who reside there. Fred doesn't give up hope though. He tells her that someday, one day, no pun intended, everything will be alright and they will both return to the land that they'll call home and rule as king and queen. Now, about this cloud. Could this dark cloud be the very thing that took his love away from him and is about to consume his sanity, like in the end of White Queen? Well, that just might be the case, but for now, let's keep going. Now we have reached the final track of Queen 2's White Side, but this time it's neither Freddie Mercury or Brian May singing or writing here. Here in this song we've got the drummer Roger Taylor in control of lyrics and vocals. The loser in the end seems to be the one track that makes everyone confused as to whether or not this album is conceptual. But that argument pretty much just boils down to how different it sounds from Queen as a whole. It has more The Who vibes than Queen vibes here. Misuse her, and you lose her as a friend. But we still shouldn't take this as being just a random song. It's still canon to the story, but with a different perspective. It could be the narrator of the story, or something along those lines, but this brief narrator is never seen again, so I guess it was just a cameo of his manifesto on childcare or something. Anyway, this song seems to be about Fred, dealing with his overprotective mother as he tries to continue socializing with his girlfriend as much as he can before he inevitably goes off to the battle that's soon to come. Sure, the lyrics are sort of disjointed and all over the place conceptually, but we've got to keep an open mind and consider the possibilities at hand here. We're talking about the story in the album, not the entire lyrical content. Maybe this song asks a very tough question. Who is the loser in the end? Is it his mother because she'll most likely never see him again if he dies in battle? Or the protagonist because he's the one dealing with all the problems of battle? We may never know, but we can sure get an idea out of the two. But for now, we're moving on to the dark side of it all. Our hero sets off to the great battle on the darkest side of the album yet. It's time to finally wrap up the story with Side Black. With Brian May and Roger Taylor out of the writer's chair, the black side of the album finally showcases the lyrical work of the singer, Freddie Mercury. Now, Ogre Battle is an interesting song in and of itself for various reasons, such as how the perspective now switches back and forth rather than keeping it simple and just switching the perspective once in a great while with each song, like on Side White. Or even how it's one of their more heavier songs that may as well have influenced the genre we now know as power metal, mostly the lyrical content. Anyway, after the events previously in White Queen, Fred now reluctantly follows in his father's footsteps after recovering from a brief period of insanity and goes into battle with the fierce, deadly ogres that we talked about in Father to Son. They weren't mentioned in that song, but if we go back to it from here, it makes the most sense. The first couple verses are in the perspective of Fred, telling about how he gains knowledge and advice from a random old man. The man tells him which signs to expect when the ogres start their approach. Now once upon a time an old man told me a fable. When the piper is gone and the soup is cold in the table, and when the black crow flies to find a new destination, that is the sign. Then the perspective changes to that of what we can assume is either the narrator again, or if Fred had picked up a flyer advertising about the battle. We may never know who or what it is, but regardless, he now knows what's about to come. The ogres arrive and appear terrifying in form, but it's the leader ogre that's the most terrifying. He appears with only one eye like a cyclops, a large mouth that can swallow oceans, giant hands that can crush any object with great force, and a long tongue that seems to catch flies like a frog.
He gives a great big cry, and he can swallow up the ocean. With a mighty tongue he catches flies in the palm of a hand, incredible size. One great big eye has a focus in your direction. Now the battle is on.
This leader ogre emits a blood-curdling scream, which signals that the battle is on. Later in the song, Fred claims that there are more ogres, which live in a two-way mirror mountain. Meaning that you cannot see through it from where you are, but the ogres which reside in it can see out of it. Like the song says. Then they see Fred and start to charge after him. The battle continues in instrumental form with the sounds of the ogres screaming as they finally lose the battle and retreat, drawing it to a close. Near the end of the song, our hero tells the old man that he can come along with him while his journey continues. But since he's never mentioned again, we can assume that he declined the offer as he doesn't want to go out and face the town in its current state. That current state is explored in the next song. Before we start with the story analysis, I'd like to say that this song is all over the place in terms of lyrical style. The Fairy Feller's Masterstroke is based on this painting by Richard Dadd, which Freddie Mercury admired. Anyway, back to the plot. Fred, our protagonist and victor of the Ogre Battle, now decides to find peace and quiet in a seemingly quaint market in the middle of a plain, regular town. But as soon as he enters with a good conscience, that's when all hell breaks loose. He sees the true nature of the place he's wandered into. During the new moon, tons of mythological creatures and normal humans who are called the fairy folk are gathered around what seems to be a magic show of some sort, taking place and run by a mysterious entity by the name of the Fairy Feller. The music is peppy and upbeat in the style of circus music, but more aggressive. It gives off a mood that is cartoony, but also reaches the level of Uncanny Valley. As the show goes on, the townsfolk and the creatures who inhabit the area go berserk and start doing things, like looking up a lady's gown, stealing things from the market, flying on dragonflies and blasting their trumpets in anger, basically just causing sheer mayhem and insanity. Apparently, they've been waiting impatiently for the Fairy Feller to crack open a nut. Is it a giant nut that could feed the population? I guess we should keep that in mind considering he can't crack it open yet. As the music escalates in the same way as the inhabitants of this once normal place, Fred revolts. He doesn't like these sights or the conditions of this once calm place, and he goes into a pit of despair, longing for there to be peace again. For there to be no more weird, harmful creatures, and for there to be food to eat and water to drink again. This despair is portrayed beautifully in this next song. Hoping to evade the escalating chaos, Fred seeks to find a quiet place to write a letter to his girlfriend, whom he lost to the dark clouds mentioned in Someday One Day. In this song Nevermore, he writes to her, telling her that nothing is sacred where he is anymore. As we mentioned in the previous track, there was apparently a drought that happened, and there's no food, rain, and no means of thriving in peace anymore.
There's no living in my life anymore. The seas have gone dry and the rain stopped falling.
He also tells her that her pain will cease to be as long as their love continues to shine through and she doesn't send him down the path to Nevermore, which could mean hell in this world. But he knows that deep down, it's too late for him to bring her back to her original self, and that she doesn't love him anymore and wants nothing more than for the world to be riddled with more terrifying entities and ogres. No food, no water, no life. Just pure chaos and despair finally realized. But hope soon arrives as she seems to have answered him in the next song. But this hope is soon shattered as the next song, The March of the Black Queen, reveals that his girlfriend, the White Queen, has been turned evil by whatever force was in the dark cloud, and that she was the one responsible for all this tragic tyranny, the creatures running rampant through the land, including the ogres, and the fatal drought that caused all the water to evaporate. Fred's first lines of dialogue are, interesting. It seems as though the Black Queen has responded to him, tricking him into thinking that she will listen to his pleas, but then she betrays him by sending guards to take him to her. The vocals then start to sound like demonic chanting. This could be the sounds of all the creatures going totally insane and excited as they see Fred about to see his girlfriend in her true evil form and to possibly be executed. Fred then tells us in a metaphoric way how he viewed the setting he was brought to before the Black Queen makes her appearance. It seems to give him the sense of a near-death experience. He sees babies in a pool, which is a reference to a book called The Water Babies by Charles Kingsley, and blue powder monkeys, which are soldiers that color themselves blue for some reason, praying to the cloud above where the Black Queen resides.
You never seen nothing like it, no, never in your life. Like going up to heaven and then coming back alive. Let me tell you all about it. So allow it. Give me a little time to choose. What a baby singing in a little pool delight. Blue animal kiss, praying in the dead.
He then sees the Black Queen marching towards the town, ordering her soldiers to go into every house they can find, steal all the people's goods, destroy the houses, and put Fred and the innocent people into her jail cells.
Here comes the Black Queen, walking in the fire. Fight for the Black Queen, marching single file. Take this, take that, bring them down to size.
Fred sees the other prisoners and even black slaves, forced to condition the prisoners and paint everyone's fingernails and toenails black to symbolize the Black Queen's undying royalty.
Put them in the cellar with the natty bar. A little liquor, sugar, then a rubber dubber, baby. Black on, everything you nail and tell me money began.
The Black Queen then starts to call their worshipping noise and says to keep doing it to fuel her power even more. Now these lyrics are in the perspective of the Black Queen, who says that she's now at full power and tells Fred that he can be her sugar baby and honey child. What does this mean? Let's assume it means she wants him to be her best slave due to his past significance in her life. The music then escalates to a ludicrous level with more chanting and more layered instruments, as if all of the Black Queen's forces have now reached their full capacity. But then suddenly, the music settles down and the perspective switches to Fred, who claims to hear a voice behind him.
Voice from
It tells him that if he keeps being good and kind-hearted, love will destroy all the darkness and evil that the Black Queen has brought upon the world, thus bringing peace back once again. This could go back to the track The Loser in the end. Fred always ignored his mother to go see his girlfriend, formerly the White Queen but now turned evil. But maybe these phrases are what she was trying to say to him in order to give him hope during the Ogre Battle. He remembers all of what his mother said to him and it relieves him for a bit. But then the music begins to escalate again. And the perspective goes to the Black Queen, who is clearly taking control of everything around her. The perspective then switches back to Fred, who feels hopeless and decides to give in to her wishes, perhaps to trick her and then kill her while she's convinced. Then, we're back in the perspective of the Black Queen, who has set her course for more land to take over. She leaves Fred and her captives alone to rot until the very end of their lives while she reigns over a new land. Fred then loses all hope and realizes that there is nothing he can do to help everyone now, and he sits alone in a cell and it segues into the next track. Fred is now completely hopeless and starts to go crazy and unhealthily think about just how funny love can be in the song Funny How Love Is, especially to him. A lot of people think that this song was just included to fill in the appropriate running time for the album, or to get radio play due to its Beach Boys influence embedded in it. But if you really think about what's going on throughout the whole album, it actually fits here, especially considering how almost insane it sounds. Anyway, our fallen hero is now curled up into a ball in his cell, screaming all of these insanity-driven words out in pain, hopelessness, and regret. Could it be a lullaby sung to him by his mother previously in his infantile development? Could it be a song he wanted to bring into the world before being sent off to battle? Or could it be the ravings of a brave hero turned lunatic by the cruel reality of the concept of love? Well, it might be the last one if you think about it hard enough. But we are going to wrap up the story with the final song. In this epic final track, Seven Seas of Rye, we are now in the perspective of the Black Queen, after years have passed and our hero Fred is no more. She and her loyal servants have ventured into the land of Rye and set off on boats across the seven seas to take over every inch of land located near them. She captures people and forces them to do her bidding, then she lets loose more creatures in her aid to fight off a heroic titan who we could assume here is the old man mentioned in Ogre Battle, who now has his own army to try and beat her forces with. I challenge the mighty titan and his two lords. And it seems to work out perfectly. Her forces are destroyed and the old man and his army sing along with the townspeople who sing in praise of this newfound hero who brought peace back into the world and has now become king. You may not think that's what the song is about, but in context, I think it works perfectly. And if you look back to the first track, Procession, the Funeral March, that's how you know they've won and the Black Queen has lost. The person who died in the beginning of the album was the Black Queen. Sure, it was an opening track, but a foreshadowing one that recaps later in the story. That's why it sounds eerie at first, but then changes to sound more grand and happy. Because yes, she was evil and she died at the hands of our new hero, but more importantly, the world of Rei can live in peace once again. This concludes the hidden story of my favorite album of all time, Queen 2. So, that was one wild ride, but one that was well worth the time once again. For me at least. This album is pure genius, not only in terms of hiding its story very cleverly, but also in terms of musicianship, lyrical content, progressive style, and just overall how epically unique the whole album is. I love it with a passion. Even the little things that may not matter much to you, but to me are just strokes of pure unbridled art. A few examples include how angelic the vocal harmonies can be,
When you say you didn't love me anymore,
how smooth, strange, and depressing the segue from a weirdly upbeat song like the Fairyfeller's Masterstroke to the despairingly somber short track Nevermore.
your mind must develop, wrap it up and if you please. There's no living in my life anymore.
And the unsettling change of tone in the March of the Black Queen,
Voice from behind me reminds me.
it's clear that Queen were not holding out when it came to recording and writing this masterpiece from beginning to end. Sure, they may have thought that it wasn't conceptual and that it was all just stuff they wrote down and liked, but I feel like there was more to it than meets the eye. I call it an anti-concept album because while you can see that there has clearly been a story branded into the whole thing, it's not entirely obvious, so you really have to examine the lyrics carefully and put two and two together to really figure out what it all may or may not mean. That and the music has not stick to just one genre. There are elements of rock, metal, power metal, acoustic ballads, glam rock, art rock, and more notably, progressive rock in this wonderful record. I also think that it's the kind of album that you have to listen to at night, as it gives it a very nice touch of fantasy and you feel like you're there in the land of Rei, looking at all these sights and battles taking place. In short, I've considered this album as the work of a higher power, angels of heaven to put it bluntly. The music is epic, the production is epic, but most of all, the story is epic. Go check out this amazing album yourself for a more different style of Queen than most of the population are used to, and you'll see that there's a whole lot more to them than the more popular hits they're praised for. Queen are my favorite band, and I like almost everything they put out, even their popular hits. But in my eyes, there is nothing that can top this album. It's a shame that most of the world has never heard this album. To me, this is the one true Queen album that really makes them Queen. It's royalty in the purest form. Keep in mind that this isn't the real story behind it, but it's just a theory of mine that I've always felt was accurate to everything involved in the lyrics and music. Call it overanalyzing or whatever you want. No matter what, this album still warms up my soul whenever I listen to it or hear someone else talk about it, because then I know that I'm not the only one who knows just how truly beautiful and royal Queen 2 is. Take care.